Welcome to Advanced Insights. I'm Mark Papermaster, CTO and EVP at AMD, and I'm excited to continue this new series where we provide just what the show name suggests, advanced insights into some of the most exciting trends and topics in technology. I'm in the studio today with Deirdre Hannaford. Deirdre is the CEO of Natcast, and Natcast is the organization formed to oversee the National Semiconductor Technology Center, which was authorized by the CHIPS and Science Act to help transform semiconductor development in the United States. Deirdre is a longtime senior executive of our semiconductor industry with many years leading roles at Synopsys, such as Chief Security Officer, co-general manager of the Synopsys Design Group, and a leader of multiple customer engagement roles. Deirdre, it is simply a pleasure to have you on the show today.
Mark, it's great to be here. Thank you so much for having me.
Well, Deirdre, we're going to jump right in. I've been really looking forward to this. You and I have had the opportunity to work together over a couple of decades now. And so I think we've got a shared experience of where, the industry worked on sort of established norms, and there was Moore's Law, and we were all sort of driving I'll say a more predictable, but certainly always a very fast-paced rise. Now we've gone it seems like on a double exponential with AI driving such a demand for more semiconductors, and it's now a matter of national interest. And I think that's really caused a change in how the government's thinking about it, and I think our listeners are going to love to hear your thoughts and how you're influencing that. But before we get into that, I would love to hear a little bit about your career journey. How did you end up in the semiconductor industry?
Well, first of all, we need to talk about how we met 20 years ago. And that was at a dinner in San Diego. And then a few hours later, we ended up at a famous party at this trade show, and really had a great opportunity to get to know each other. And it's been wonderful to be an industry colleague of yours ever since. So that was 20 years ago. We'd need to dial a little bit further back to get into my background. But briefly, my dad was an engineer. My older sis was an engineer. And so therefore, I was going to become an engineer. And what a great career choice this has been. I ended up at Synopsys as employee number 8 and spent really the vast majority of my career there. And it's been wonderful to see everything that you mentioned, this industry just get propelled forward. And I know it feels like we're on this exponential trajectory right now, but every year's felt like that, hasn't it? I mean, every single year has been a huge velocity drive. And I'm super excited about where we're going as an industry now. But you're right, this now is a very, very important national interest.
Well, I'm going to pivot off of that background because I'm going to just give a personal perspective. I mean, as I worked with you over those 2 decades, like all of us as engineers and the management and executive roles you're in, problem solving is front and center. But the roles you took on, Deirdre, always involved technical problem solving, but also bringing people together, actually listening to people, absorbing to what they said, giving them your insights and steering. And the latest opportunity that you and I had to work together was on the Department of Commerce Industry Advisory Council, where you chaired our working group on public-private partnership. And, wow, that was a great experience because I think there was some great minds that were pulled together. It took on, I think, problems that we all felt were relevant because you had leaders that were directly facing the challenges, that had actually faced those challenges over many years. Maybe you could just tell me a little bit before we get into the meat of what we did there about that role.
So thank you, Mark. This is the CHIPS Industry Advisory Committee. What a great opportunity to serve our country in this capacity and advise the Department of Commerce on the implementation of the CHIPS Act, specifically the R&D side of the CHIPS Act. And so, 24 of us got together, a newly formed team. We split up into subgroups. And the governance group, or the public-private partnership group, was all about how should the CHIPS R&D function get stood up? What type of organizational structure should we have? For instance, that committee recommended establishing an independent, nonprofit organization, which became NatCast, to be the operator of the National Semiconductor Technology Center. We spent a lot of time thinking about intellectual property rules as people come together and collaborate. But I have to say, the funnest part of it was just working with all the intelligent folks in the industry. And I have to say, being the leader of that was really challenging because you've got really great minds like the CTO of AMD on that committee. You've got other CTOs, great brains, and it was really, really wonderful to bring all those great minds together, really spend significant amounts of time talking about tough challenges and getting to the point where we could have strong recommendations and have great readouts for the industry.
What I was wondering, as we were on that work group together, would our recommendations be heard? And of course, the recommendation that was first and foremost on many of our minds was, would what became NatCast and you know, as you're in the role that you now have, would it be a government entity or would it be set up as a more of an independent group to drive truly, you know, have some latitude in creating that public-private partnership to administer the task? So, you know, we fast forward to today. Congratulations again, you were appointed to run this. And maybe you could describe, you know, to those listening in, how is that accomplished? And give us a little bit of insight into the role you have in leading NatCast. And you had input from our IAC work group as well as others. And I know we'll get back into a minute on some of the specifics. But first, what is it that you're up against as you're trying to stand up this new entity?
Oh my goodness gracious, how much time do we have, Mark? No, it's such an honor. It's a real honor. And so when you think about, you know, Congress passed the CHIPS and Science Act 2 years ago this August, and you know, the majority of that is being implemented in Department of Commerce. There's $39 billion put in place, mostly to put new fabs in place around the country, and $11 billion for R&D. And so of the $11 billion, interestingly, 3 of the 4 programs are actually being implemented inside of Department of Commerce. The packaging program, the metrology program, and a Manufacturing USA program focused on digital twin, which I think is going to be super interesting because one of the IAC recommendations on the R&D working group was to try and set up really essentially a digital twin of a fab. So I'm glad to see that initiative getting launched right now, and it's in solicitation. But those are being driven by the Department of Commerce. The National Semiconductor Technology Center, as you indicated, is set up as a public-private partnership. Why? Because you know, you've got the best of the government, you've got our colleagues in Department of Commerce and the other members of the NSTC consortium and DoD, DOE, NSF, and then you have the industry. Because when you look at innovation in our country, it's, of course, you know, our government sponsors with great organizations like DARPA and the like, you know, amazing innovation like you all do in conjunction with DOE in the supercomputing space. But also you have wonderful universities, you have great national labs, and you have industry. So we need to make sure as we're driving the leadership of semiconductor R&D forward in this country, that all those voices are involved.
So, Deirdre, as you said, oh my God, $11 billion that we have. It's a tremendous opportunity. It's a statement of taxpayer dollars being applied to keep the U.S. at the preeminence of semiconductor innovation. And so I have to ask then, so here you are, you're in the role of NatCast and getting NST stood up. What are your top 2 or 3 priorities as you think about, you know, putting the dollars into action?
I would say that we have to get on base, to, you know, make sure that we have some early wins so that we build some momentum. I think that's going to be super important, but we also need to be thinking about building enduring value. But to what you had talked about earlier in terms of the various missions, you know, we really have 3 focus areas. Okay. The first I'm going to spend time on is workforce. I had an opportunity to speak with an industry consortium that briefed me on what they're doing in workforce, and it was super impressive. And, you know, I think that there's a lot of focus, as you say, around the country on how do we build next generation workforce. The Semiconductor Industry Association wrote a report about a year ago that focused on what are the gaps in workforce in this country? And their estimate by the year 2030, this industry is going to be short about 67,000 workers. So that's pretty substantial. We need to change our trajectory in order to plug that gap. And if you look at our focus in NatCast and STC and around the industry at large, there's technicians that need to fill these fabs, right? And so those may be folks that are coming from straight out of high school into training programs or spend a couple of years in community colleges. Mm-hmm. There's also the next generation of engineers, chip designers like you hire here at AMD, and then the researchers as well. So we need to be very broad-based in terms of the folks that we recruit and train and retrain and retain in our industry. We can't corner the STEM market and assume they're all going to come into our field. So workforce is going to be very important. How do we make sure people get excited about this field like you and I are? And then how do we train them and then keep them? So workforce is going to be a huge initiative for the National Semiconductor Technology Center, but we're going to do this alongside industry. Mm-hmm. If we don't focus workforce on what the employers need, we'll have missed the mark. So let's really focus on purpose-built training around the country that we can truly leverage. So that's initiative number one. Mm-hmm. I think when you think about it at AMD, how do you view the workforce challenge?
I could not agree with you more on talent development. For us at AMD, and I think all of us in the industry, talent's job one. We can only bring the innovation if we have the right talent. And so we're very invested. We have intern programs, we have research grants that we give. And what I love about the National Semiconductor Technology Center that stands up, I actually think that you might be able to bring some coordination where we're aligned, where we might all independently be working on aspects of workforce development that now we could coordinate further with your help.
Yeah, something as simple as an undergraduate class and taping out a chip. Mm-hmm. If we can get a really great base curriculum, and I know there's some great programs out there, how can we leverage that so that professors at various schools that maybe aren't an expert in chip design like you are can teach that class confidently and have great labs so that students can have a wonderful experience and get excited about our field. So it's about cultivating that next generation, but it's also making sure that employees in our companies have wonderful experiences and continue to grow. And I know that's the case at AMD, never a question there.
That would be excellent.
But spurring innovation in this country has many components, including investment funding, right? So that's a key component. And so we want to be able to help seed innovation with an investment fund. But another key component of that is going to be, how do we help chip designers get started? And you have an amazing design infrastructure at AMD. You have entire teams that are charged to maintain that infrastructure, have all the foundry collateral staged and ready for the chip design teams to go. But it's a daunting task for a small company. And so how can we create more infrastructure, perhaps leveraging design on the cloud, having relationships with foundries to have that collateral clearly staged, having design flows ready to go. I have this vision of an entrepreneur being able to kind of plug into the cloud and start designing. I mean, that's just an amazing opportunity. And if we can take a lot of that friction out of small companies' experiences, hopefully we can create the next AMD and create more innovation in the country. So we're looking at ways to not only build the next generation of workforce, how do we help enable the next generation of great companies in this country? And it won't just be design companies. I mean, there could be wonderful advances in materials, mm-hmm. in lithography. I mean, we really need to think about the whole design and semiconductor manufacturing ecosystem and find ways to eke out those next generation of innovators. So I think this is a wonderful opportunity. So that's theme 2, mm-hmm. right? More work, more engineers, more successful contributors to our net economic and national security. But number 3 is the big kahuna. That is our research agenda. Where does NSTC want to lean in? Because if you add up all the R&D investments by great companies like yours and add up all the semiconductor R&D investments across the United States, I don't even know what that number is, but on average, U.S. semiconductor firms invest about 18% of their revenue back into R&D.
We're
higher,
about 20, actually.
Right, so a significant, substantial amount of investment in R&D. The universities have substantial investment in R&D. There's a lot of innovation happening in this country, and a lot of research being conducted. So where should NSTC weigh in? And I think this is going to be a big question, and one that we need to think very carefully about. What assets do we stand up in order to enable more research? And what research do we commission, or in fact even conduct ourselves potentially? So this is a big job, and one that we don't want to do alone. This is where the consortium, where the public-private partnership is going to make a huge difference. We have to kind of understand what assets and what capabilities are out there today, and then how do we augment those with enduring assets that we hope to stand up at NSTC.
Yeah, you and I are close to it, but I think it's a fundamental description you just gave of what the Semiconductor Technology Center is going to address. By bridging the gap of lab to fab, that's been the barrier. That's been stifling innovation in the semiconductor field. So accomplishing that goal can really be incredibly impactful.
That's why I'm not sleeping much right now, Mark. There's a lot to that goal, but I think it's exciting. You know, we don't want to see great ideas finish when the PhD paper gets published. If it's a promising idea, we want to help usher that to the next stage. But I had a thought-provoking conversation with a firm a couple of weeks ago, and they talked about another interesting challenge we have in this country that, you know, if you think about something as simple as, you know, what happens after gate-all-around? Well, people seem to be converging on CFET, right? And I'm not the expert there, but that seems to be the word.
So a new transistor
the next
design
generation
altogether.
Yes, what comes after gate-all-around is the CFET the candidate. But as folks look beyond that, there's a host of candidates. And what I understand is that there's research going on all over the world, including in great labs and universities in the United States. How do we coordinate that discussion? How do we convene those stakeholders? How do we make sure that the research that's being conducted is complementing the research rather than duplicating the research? How do we spend our dollars wisely? So I'm excited also about not only work that we might commission, but can we play a role of coordinator and convener in this regard?
Well, I think that the game plan you have is going to be incredibly successful, and I think we're a poster child at AMD of an example of a different government initiative of public-private partnership that accomplished in a different aspect, but that goal of getting industry united on a common goal. And that was when the Department of Energy set out a grand challenge to get to exascale computing. You know, 1 billion times 1 billion floating point operations a second of very, very high precision math. And they set out a target. We applied and got grants that really enabled us to be positioned to now be powering the Oak Ridge National Labs and standing up Lawrence Livermore National Labs with the top supercomputers in the world. When you look at what you're setting up, there's a lot of similarities. You're putting the challenge out there. You've got a set of funding to entice people, and you're lowering barriers. I think it's on us in industry and academia to figure out, you know, how to partner with you. How do we make that happen? And my advice is pretty fundamental. It's called goal alignment. Do we agree on a problem that if we solve this problem, it can really enable through the innovation that would result in the win-win? And then from the mission of NatCast, is it in line with the national interests of making sure that the United States stays the leader in innovation in semiconductors?
So there's a lot of areas that I think will be naturally rallying cries. But there'll be some areas where, gee, this is a great time to pool, and then all of a sudden it's like, well, now we're going to take our IP and go innovate as a company. And we're going to have to really figure out how to do that in an impactful way and make sure that we create an environment where people can collaborate, where collaboration is going to make sense, and then let them go innovate where they need to innovate and serve their company goals. And hopefully, in turn, as well, serve our national goals.
Yeah, and I think we're, you know, if we are thoughtful about it, I'm certain we can do that. You mentioned security and standards. You know, those two do go together. I've been involved with several in the industry on creating some industry standards, because you have to know when one chip talks to another, do you know who I am and I know who you are? Yep. You know, can we build an absolutely rock solid, secure flow, including right through the semiconductor manufacturing process? You know, that's a challenge that we can band together on. But you can architect it in such a way that then there's programming interfaces on top of that where the companies could then differentiate and provide services on top of it. So I think if we, and whatever the task, so that might be semiconductor security, but in the other challenges, if we think about where can we band together, where can we enable, and then where can industry then improve upon that in more bespoke proprietary ways, that's a recipe for great collaboration.
Well, and you look at what's happening in the data center right now with advent of large language models and all the training, and there's so many really interesting challenges that need to get solved. The CPU memory compute bandwidth challenges, just bandwidth in the data center at period, sustainability in the data center. I mean, we could just do grand challenges alone in the area of data centers right now, and I think we'd be busy for the next several decades. But it just shows, our industry's moving fast, and we need to be responsive to the needs of the industry and be nimble and do what we do great in this country, which is innovate.
Fantastic. Deirdre, as we come up to close, what would be your call to action to the rest of us?
Thank you to everyone who's listening, because I think this is a really important conversation, right? We do what we do great in this country, which is compete. So I think every single company in this country needs to continue to innovate and compete and be your very best.
Well, thank you, Deirdre, for being with us. And I can tell you on behalf of my role and on AMD, we are looking forward to partnering with you in your role and seeing us drive innovation through the public-private partnership which you have under your charge at NatCast.
Let's get going.
All right.
Thank you.
Thank you. I truly enjoyed chatting with Deirdre about accelerating semiconductor innovation. The main takeaways that I had from our discussion is how NatCast and the National Semiconductor Technology Centers are going to really address semiconductor workforce development, how it could help us reduce the barrier going from lab to fab, the idea to the implementation in silicon of new innovative ideas, and how this NSTC could be an alignment point for us in both industry and academia in coming together to progress the semiconductor industry. Thank you for joining us today on Advanced Insights. I look forward to bringing you more in-depth conversations on cutting-edge technology, industry insights, and visionary perspectives from some of the brightest minds in the field. If you enjoyed today's discussion, don't forget to subscribe to AMD on YouTube and follow me on LinkedIn so that you never miss a future episode. Technology is always advancing, and I can't wait to share more insights with you next time.